I challenged myself to create a copy of 90s anime in Blender using grease pencil, and I think the result will surprise you. There is a catch. Watch until the end. So, the main goal was to find out what it takes to get the aesthetics of that era using free digital tools like Blender and Krita. Is it even possible? Recreating iconic anime styles, like Studio Ghibli's, isn't just about tools, it's about process. Today, we are diving into 2D animation with Blender's grease pencil to see if we can capture the artistry of a scene from Princess Mononoke. I picked this scene from Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke and I tried to create a copy in Blender. I wanted to see if there are any limitations that could prevent us from getting the similar look and to find some tricks that you can apply to your animations too. On top of that, it's a great opportunity to learn something from the masters of that era. In my opinion, learning is a must-have skill every creative person should have. That's why I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is a massive online learning community where you can find classes on everything creative. Whether you are into concept art, 2D animation, 3D modeling, or just learning how to sketch, they've got you covered. When I started learning art, finding helpful information about digital art was tough. It took me years of trial and error to reach a decent level and start working in a video game industry. I made countless mistakes along the way. Now you have access to the knowledge of hundreds of industry professionals in various fields, so you can improve your skills much faster than I did. It's always easier when someone experienced guides you through the process. Whether you're a beginner or an industry professional like me, there is always something new to learn. That's why I believe learning is the most important skill. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today! But first, let's rewind and explore why anime from 80s and 90s feels so special, and why we don't see anything quite like it today. Anime from that era has a quite unique charm, thanks in part to the technology used to create it. Cell animation. Each frame was hand-drawn on a transparent sheet called a cell. These cells were layered over static backgrounds and photographed one by one to create the illusion of movement. The hand-drawn techniques, expressive line work, and limited color palette gave this animation their distinctive look, while the scanning process added the nostalgic vintage feel we love today. Over time, anime demand skyrocketed and production schedule tightened, leaving less room for detailed craftsmanship. Digital tools and skilled artists boosted efficiency, but the focus often shifted to quantity over quality. This led to simpler designs and animations, allowing for faster output but at the cost of the detailed artistry seen in older works. Recreating 90s anime aesthetics has become a popular topic in the art community, with many attempts to replicate the style in 3D. While it's an exciting technical challenge that can deliver impressive results, it still demands a lot of manual work to achieve more artistic control over the final image. The truth is, 3D doesn't easily translate into 2D without extra steps. Techniques like customizing vertex normals for better shading, masking shadows, or even painting over the final render are often necessary. Because of this, you rarely see 3D animations that perfectly mimic a true 2D style. No matter how skilled the artists are, there are always a noticeable difference. If you want to recreate the style and feel of anime from that era, you need to follow a similar path to what was done back then. Simply put, you won't reach the same destination if you take a completely different route. Using digital tools is already a big deviation, so you'll need to take extra steps to get back on track. Let's break down the process. I'll start by completing a single frame from start to finish, because if I can do one frame, I can do all of them. First comes the drawing. I know it's not entirely fair, but I'll be copying the drawing from the movie. Hear me out. Drawing is software independent. It doesn't matter what tools you are using if you know how to draw. and luckily, we have decades of materials to study to get closer to the masters of that era. We will revisit this topic later in the video. For now, let's see if it's even possible to recreate that nostalgic feel in Blender and how challenging it is. Let's start by importing the reference footage and setting up the camera. In Blender 4.3, which I'm using, line thickness is based on world units. To simulate an NGD ratio, I set the background image size to 192 by 108 centimeters. This way, a 1 mm brush radius in Blender should correspond to 1 pixel radius in other 2D softwares. I've set the camera to orthographic mode because this shot doesn't have camera movement. I positioned the camera so the reference image fills the entire frame. The line radius in this shot falls between 1.5 and 1.8 mm based on the reference footage. One major difference between traditional cell animation and digital work is the sharpness and perfection of digital drawings. Modern anime often looks too polished, but imperfections are what make old work so appealing. That's why we'll replicate the line blurriness you can see in the footage. In Blender, go to Effects, Add Blur and set the size to 2.5 units. Don't forget to switch to Render Preview mode in the viewport to see the effect. It looks pretty close. Now, let's do the drawing. I started by tracing the main character, trying to stay as close to the reference footage as possible. If I need to fix lines, I switch to Edit or Sculpt mode and move them manually. I notice on the reference that the line art has subtle variations in thickness. Some inner details have thinner lines, while silhouette defining lines are slightly thicker. That's why I'm enabling pressure sensitivity toggle for the brush size. When I finished tracing sun, I created another layer for the wolf and traced it the same way. On top of the line art, I drew color separation lines, temporary lines to help fill in lights and shadows. Next, coloring. Back then, animators used real paint to color cells, which gave the colors a naturally desaturated look. To mimic this, we are also using desaturated colors in our work. Blender offers built-in tools for coloring and for automation, but its fill tool isn't perfect. Gaps in the line art and tight spaces often cause issues. That's why for coloring I use the add-on called Ghibli-inspired. It has several features for coloring, including Smart Fill, where small paint strokes guide the algorithm to fill areas, and Interactive Manual Fill. Both have effective gap closing mechanisms. I prepared material for every color I needed and started coloring. Quick tip: Ghibli-inspired requires a single line art layer for coloring. If your line art and color separation lines are on different layers, create a merged copy so the add-on can use them. Japanese animators use color wisely. Behind its simplicity lies balance. Using too many colors and shades adds complexity, which, when multiplied by number of frames, create an enormous workload. For example, a recent animation I worked on was a nightmare to color because of this. I spent hours just coloring a few frames because I have a lot of shades for a single material. That's why keeping it simple is so important. What about backgrounds? Backgrounds were also painted manually. To challenge myself, I tried to replicate the background as closely as possible to the reference. I rendered the character and pasted them into Krita as a guide before starting the background painting. Digital painting tends to look clean and perfect with smooth brush strokes and flawless color mixing. To mimic traditional methods, you need to manually add imperfections and emulate brush strokes. Traditional painting often have happy accidents caused by paper texture or imperfect brushes, which create the illusion of extra detail. Replicating this digitally isn't easy and usually requires extra steps. At first, I struggled to find the right brushes for the background, but eventually used one with a rough edge for texture and a simple round brush for details like grass. You can get the full video process on my Gumroad for free, check the link below. Once the painting was done, I applied it as a texture on the background plane in Blender. The final touch is effects and compositing. I added a bloom effect to the grease pencil object to create a dreamy vibe. To simulate a vintage look, We need grain, color bleeding, and chromatic aberrations. I made an animated color noise in Krita to overlay over the render, since Blender's built-in noise node is monochrome and I wanted full color and non-static noise. For color bleed, I slightly blurred the render with a blur node and used a hue mix node followed by a saturation node. This made the color bleed outside the line art, adding more imperfections. Finally, the cherry on top, chromatic aberration. This effect occurs when bright lights distort edges in photography, creating subtle color shifts around the line art. It gives everything that extra nostalgic touch. To do that, I use a lens distortion node and check the projector checkbox. These simple adjustments make the render look less polished, mimicking the style of the 90s. Now, all that left is to draw the entire animation and use the materials I've already prepared for coloring. Remember when I said that results might surprise you? Some of you might have noticed that the scene I showed you earlier wasn't the original scene from the movie. In fact, it was my recreation. Here is a side-by-side comparison with the reference footage. If you want to explore the animation yourself, you can get the source file on my Gumroad for free. Check the link below. It can be also used for practicing drawing in-betweens or coloring. So, what did I learn from making this scene? First of all, it is possible to achieve a professional-looking animation in Blender using grease pencil. But to capture the charm of 90s anime, you need to embrace the same artistic principles. Drawing is fundamental. Blender's grease pencil is a fantastic tool for 2D animation, but the real artistry lies in the process, not just the software. You can recreate the feel of that era, but it takes couple extra steps to make the drawing look less perfect. Once you achieve that, scaling up becomes much easier. What about skill in drawing though? Nothing beats skill. It is still very important to practice. But Blender and digital tools can enhance your efficiency and quality. You can use 3D to create line art for your 2D animation, design characters or environments, and improve framing and composition, plus so much more. These tools make it much easier to achieve the complexity and charm of vintage anime, even if you are not a very experienced artist. For example, check out this video where I used a 3D base to create a walk cycle. I'm not super experienced in animation, but with Blender's tools I managed to create something pretty solid. Don't forget, Skillshare is giving a free 1-month trial to the first 500 people to use my link in the description. Alright, see you in the next one.